Professor of Philosophy and Religious Studies here at Chandler-Gilbert Community College. On behalf of the Philosophy and Religious Studies Department, I would like to welcome all students in attendance, as well as community members, staff, and administration. And I would especially like to thank all faculty members who are here and who encourage their students to come. Before we hear from our distinguished speaker, I wanted to say a few words about why I organized this event. A college education is meant to prepare students for life after college, and this can mean training to work in a certain industry. But another purpose of college, in fact, I think the main purpose, is to prepare students for the rest of their lives outside of employment. So while it is true that taking classes in the humanities does greatly increase a person's earning potential, study in the humanities excels first and foremost in giving students the conceptual tools to understand what is good and just and how we ought to live together. If this interests you, and it should interest everybody, then I invite you to enroll in philosophy classes and religious studies classes here at Chandler-Gilbert Community College. For a student in the United States in 2021, what this means is living in a country that is likely much more diverse than the smaller circle of family and friends that they interacted with before college. The diversity in our country is not a weakness, but a strength. But in order to thrive in a diverse society, a person must not be afraid of, or baffled by, or a total stranger to his or her neighbors. And the best way for people to learn who they are sharing their country and their culture with is by meeting them face to face and hearing them speak. But despite the fact that Muslims have been a part of this country since before it was founded and have made innumerable contributions to this country and to the world, most Americans have never met a Muslim. And without this direct encounter, the lack of knowledge about Muslims is left to be filled by irresponsible figures in the media and politics with the loudest voices who spread innuendo, half-truths, and quite a few bald-faced lies. It is my hope that the event today will help to discredit the caricature of Muslims that has been aggressively promoted by some of the least knowledgeable but most powerful people and institutions in our country. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Azra Hussain is the president and co-founder of the Islamic Speakers Bureau of Arizona, or ISBA. In this capacity, she trains speakers and presents about Islam and Muslims throughout Arizona. She also plans and facilitates interfaith events and educational forums. She's one of the founding members of the Scottsdale Mosque and has served on its board for 10 years. She started and ran the Sunday school at that mosque, as well as two youth groups, the Muslim Youth Association of Arizona for youth age 12 to 18, and the Junior Arizona Muslims for kids 7 to 11 years old. She has been in Arizona for 40 years. She's married and has 4 adult children and 2 grandsons. So please join me in welcoming back to Chandler-Gilbert Community College, Azra Hussain.
Azra, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, sorry about that. I have no idea what happened. So we're going to try this again. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. And please bear with me. I'm not sure if I'm going to do this right because I did it okay in the tech check. Here we go. All right. And then full screen, right? Hold on. How do I go with full screen? Ha, we did it. Well, good morning. I'm going to talk to you today about Muslims, especially American Muslims and their faith. This is a very basic presentation, and I would invite, I'd like to invite questions, and it's up to the organizers how you wish to do this, whether you're going to take questions throughout the presentation or at the end. It's up to you. I'm fine with either way. With that, I'm going to go ahead and begin. I'm going to greet you all by saying Assalamu alaikum. I have a quick question. There is a pop-up here that says it's an annotation request. Am I supposed to ignore it or am I supposed to?
Yeah,
It
go ahead and
says
ignore it or tell it no.
decline. All right, sorry
Yeah.
about that. All right, so Assalamu alaikum, it means peace be upon you. As a Muslim, I will greet all people, not just Muslims, with a greeting of peace. It translates to peace be upon you, and the response to that is usually wa alaikum assalam, and may peace be upon you too. Now, this is not very different from the Jewish or Hebrew greeting shalom aleichem, for which the response is wa aleichem shalom. Nowadays, it's abbreviated to shalom. And also within the Christian tradition, there's also something called passing the peace, where we say, peace be with you, and also with you is the response. So, assalamu alaikum wa alaikum assalam is just a greeting of peace, and Muslims around the world, regardless of whether they speak Arabic or not, usually end up using this greeting. And it did not change screens for me. I have no idea what just happened. Here we go, up and down. So I'm going to go ahead and skip this slide just because we're going to go through. Going to define the term Islam. The name of the religion that I follow is Islam. The word itself is an Arabic word, and the way the Arabic language works is all Arabic words come from 3 or 4 letter root words. In the case of this word, SLM, silm, is the root word. Silm means peace. Also, there are several, sub-meanings as well that kind of make it a little bit more defined and more detailed than just peace. But the word Islam itself, one could define as saying peace through following God's guidance, or a person who's trying to achieve inner peace by following the laws of God. Now, a person who follows this religion would be referred to as a Muslim. I would not be an Islamic person, but you would refer to me as a Muslim, a person who follows Islam. And now you can see from this slide that Muslims are a very diverse group in terms of race, languages, nationality, ethnicities. And so, you can find Muslims throughout the world, and I'll show you that on the world map. By about 2017, the numbers that were being quoted was about 1.8 billion Muslims worldwide. Now, that is almost a quarter of the world's population. The largest number, and I'm not sure if you can see my little mouse thing here, but the largest number would be found in South Asia, making up about 550 million Muslims, and then the Arab countries, and after that, Southeast Asia, and then Iran, and then Turkey, Central Asia, China, Europe, North America, South America, and also Australia. So you can see that Muslims are spread throughout the world. And so what I wanted to show you is, actually what I want to share with you is in America, when people say Muslim, a lot of people just assume that means Arab. And when we say Arab, they assume that means Muslim. And in fact, in both cases, they're wrong. Because if you look at the total population of Muslims worldwide, only about 15% of them are Arab, which means 85% of Muslims throughout the world are not Arab. So what am I telling you when you say somebody's an Arab? I'm not talking about the country they come from. I'm not talking about, how they celebrate, how they dress, etc., etc. About the only thing I'm really talking about is a language that's spoken, and that too a language that's been spoken in their families for generations. So for me, I don't speak Arabic. I'm not considered an Arab Muslim. I could learn the language. It'll probably take me a few thousand years. I could learn the language, but once I do, I don't suddenly become an Arab Muslim, because this comes in a context of culture, and so the language developed over thousands of years. So what ends up happening is an Arab Muslim would be somebody whose family has spoken Arabic for generations. right? So it's not a geographic thing. It's not a definition of um, how they dress, how they celebrate, but more of this passing down of history through the language. So only 15% of Muslims are Arab. And in fact, in America, it's an even smaller number of Muslims who are Arab. So just so you know, I want to talk a little bit about diversity amongst Muslims. Like I showed you in our first slide, Muslims are a very diverse group in terms of race and language and ethnicity, etc. But on a personal level, there are many, many factors that influence the way I behave, let alone other people. There are certain things that I do and say just because I'm a woman. There are certain things that I do and say just because I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm the director of an organization. All of these things influence the ways I behave and the way I speak. And for most people, things like culture and background, family, upbringing, education, all of these things influence how a person behaves, how a person reacts. And so those are things that one needs to take into account instead of making blanket statements about all Muslims do or all Christians say or all, Jewish people do this. So it's a function of not just making these big blanket statements, but also looking at people in the context of their environment, who they are, how they grew up. And just like people of other faiths, Muslims also have varying degrees of observance. Many of you know somebody who goes to church at least once a week. Others of you may know somebody who absolutely never goes to church. And then again, there are some people who do go to church sometimes and not, not regularly, etc. So all of us know people like that. And then the same with Muslims. There are Muslims who pray 5 times a day. There are Muslims who absolutely never pray. And then there's Muslims who pray instead of 5 times a day, maybe once a day, maybe once a week. And so you're going to find, you know, even amongst Muslims, varying degrees of observance. And what do all these people call themselves? They call themselves Muslim, right? So just because somebody is a Muslim, it doesn't mean that they're all going to do exactly what other Muslims are doing. And then, of course, as human beings, our behavior may contradict our religion or our religious traditions. So those are things that we need to recognize. So just labeling somebody based on stereotypes is actually a mistake because it fails to recognize that humans are the ones practicing this faith or any faith. And with that, they're going to be very, very different levels of observance, levels of behavior, etc. This slide, I only really show it because most people think of American Muslims as foreigners, where, in 2017, the Pew Research Center showed that 82% of American Muslims are US citizens, and also 42% of American Muslims were born in the US. So that's actually a significant number because a lot of us think of Muslims as being new to this country and foreign to this country. So we need to understand that that is not really the case. I want to discuss history of Muslims in America. According to historians, anywhere between 1 out of every 5 to 1 out of every 3 people who was forcibly brought to the US during the North Atlantic slave trade was a Muslim. Since 1875, Muslims have migrated to America for about the same reasons that any other person did, to get away from oppressive governments, freedom of religion, better education, better opportunities, better jobs. All of the reasons why others came to America is the same reason why Muslims also chose to come to America. Since 1965, when we changed our immigration laws, Muslim students from across the world came to America, studied here, and many of them then settled in America. And while this was Muslims who've migrated in the last few decades, you're also talking about African American Muslims who rediscovered Islam, although they'd been here, several hundred years, because they'd been brought over during that time. So we have this a history of Muslims in the US, and today you're going to find Muslims who are in every area of American life: doctors, lawyers, academics, also in terms of people who are taxi drivers and people who are teachers and in the government and serving in our military and our armed forces, serving on our peace officers, police officers. And so you'll find Muslims as part and parcel of the America that we live in today. Just so you see that Muslims can be, seen in American life, throughout our TV shows and stuff. Over here are some examples of Muslims. You may or may not know them, right? The top left is Ibtihaj Muhammad, who represented the U.S. Team in the Olympics as a fencer. And then Hassan Minhaj, who's a comedian, and he's an actor, right next to her to the right. And to the right of him is Rami Nashashibi, who is an activist, and so on and so forth. A couple of people down, you see Fareed Zakaria from CNN's Fareed Zakaria GPS. Also Dr. Oz and Bella Hadid on the lower slides, on the lower pictures. So these are people who are famous Americans, and that some of you may have heard of. And then you have American Muslims in academia. These are people who are professors, they're chairs in big universities like Duke and in fact Harvard. And one of them is actually also is a founder of a liberal arts college in Berkeley, California. So Muslims are also here. And then, of course, Muslims who serve our country as, government officials, or even in our as judges, as well as people in our armed forces. I'm going to talk about what Islam teaches. Islam teaches, at least Muslims, that we need to work towards excellence in character to better ourselves and also to better the world. Now, it doesn't mean that we're expecting everyone to be perfect. What Muslims strive for is striving towards being the best version of oneself. And again, as humans, that's not always possible. We fail in many ways, but as long as we're constantly trying, that's what Islam works towards. Especially in terms of moral character, Islam also teaches a set of values that give great importance to protecting and preserving life and mercy and justice. This includes things like respecting the earth and all its creatures, taking care of and being kind to people who are less fortunate, and also there is a strong importance given to education and seeking knowledge for both men and women, and of course also honesty and truthfulness, not just in words but also in actions. I want to talk to you about how Islam is taught to us. It's in terms of 3 dimensions. In Arabic, those words would be Iman for beliefs, Islam for practices, and Ihsan for the goals of those practices. But I'm going to talk about each one of these in a little bit of detail. The very first one, in terms of major beliefs, all Muslims throughout the world believe in God, in his angels, in the prophets, in holy books, in afterlife, and also God's will. I'm going to talk about each one of these in a little bit of detail. I'm sure you've heard the word Allah. Muslims believe in one God. And you may have heard the word Allah, but that's the Arabic word for God. So Arabic-speaking Christians refer to God as Allah. That's because that's the word in their language for God. The same way is if I speak German only, I will say Gott when I speak about God. Or if I'm speaking Spanish, I'll say Dios. Does that mean that that's three different gods? No, those are just different languages, and those are the those are the words in those languages that refer to God. When I speak in English, I always talk about God. But as a Muslim, I conduct many of my prayers in using passages that I've memorized from the Quran, which is in Arabic. And so when the word for God comes up during that time, it's always Allah. And so when I, recite from the Quran or when I recite my prayers, I will be using the word Allah. But when I speak English 90% of the time or more than that, and then I use the word God. Muslims believe in the same God as Jews and Christians. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are referred to as the Abrahamic faiths because they can trace their history back to the prophet Abraham. Muslims, just like Jews and Christians, also believe in angels. We believe that God created beings of an unseen light to, do his work for him. And although we can't see angels, we believe that we're surrounded by them on earth, in our workspaces, and also out in the universe. Now, here are names of some archangels: Gabriel, Michael, and Raphael. In Arabic, they'd be Jibril, Mikael, and Israfil. And again, as far as we're concerned, we don't see them, but Muslims believe in them. Muslims also believe that God created human beings and gave us the ability to choose, and then sent teachers over and over again through the ages to teach us how to make good choices. Now, these teachers are who Muslims refer to as prophets, and what they taught was how to live righteously and be good to each other, and believe that only God should be worshipped. Now, having said that, according to Muslims, there have been, several thousand prophets from the beginning of time until the Prophet Muhammad. And so I'll share with you some of the prophets that Muslims believe in. Although I've told you that, there's thousands or tens of thousands of prophets that Muslims believe in, according to Quran, only about 25 of them were actually mentioned by name and so you may or may not recognize some of these. According to Muslims, Adam, Noah, Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, David, all of these are prophets of Islam. For Muslims, these are all prophets that we believe in and respect. And so these are not separate prophets from Muslim prophets. For us, these are all prophets who are an example for Muslims to follow. Ending in this long line of prophets with the Prophet Muhammad. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Prophet Muhammad. According to Muslims, he was born in the year 570 in the city of Makkah. Neither he nor anyone around him knew that he was a prophet until he turned 40, at which point we believe that he was visited by the angel Gabriel while, spending some time alone in a cave near his city. At that point, we believe that he received the first revelations of the Quran. We believe that when he started to share this message with his friends, his family, and his neighbors, many people were against this. A few did follow him. And of course, the few that did follow him suffered persecution and sometimes torture at the hands of those who didn't. So a group of Muslims, migrated and to escape this persecution and torture to Abyssinia, which is present-day Ethiopia, where they actually were given refuge and protected by a Christian king at that time. But those who stayed on in Makkah continued, being persecuted and treated badly. And so in the year 622, Muslims in a large group actually migrated from Makkah to Medina. Medina at that time was not exactly a full city. It was groups of tribes that loosely were connected to each other. And so once Muslims migrated there, they started living together and forming, a community. Now, the year 622 is important for Muslims because that marks the year one for the Muslim calendar. Just like Jews, Muslims keep track of a lunar calendar to keep track of their holy days and festivals. And a lunar calendar tends to be 10 to 12 days shorter than the solar calendar that is generally accepted and followed in the world. So what ends up happening is when we put the two calendars together once a year, there's a shift. So, and I'll talk about that a little bit in the next few slides, but Muslims believe that Muhammad died at the age of 63 in the city of Medina. Muslims also believe in holy books. We believe that although there were, tens of thousands of prophets, only a handful of them had been given divine revelation or direct messages from God. Muslims believe in the scrolls as revealed to Abraham, in the Torah as revealed to Moses, in the Psalms as revealed to David, in the Gospel as revealed to Jesus, and in the Quran as revealed to Muhammad. Now, since the Quran is the book that I know a little bit more about, that's the one I'm going to talk about today. The word Quran in Arabic means recitation. It consists of 114 chapters, and it is in the Arabic language. Muslims believe that the Prophet Muhammad was visited by the angel Gabriel over a period of 23 years, where he received messages from God, which he memorized and then shared with his followers, who also memorized them. And according to Muslim tradition, while he was reciting this to his followers, scribes were writing this down in real time. So for Muslims, we believe the Quran was preserved as it was revealed 1400 years ago. Today, anywhere from the northern hemisphere to the southern, from the eastern hemisphere to the western, no matter where you go, if Muslims are going to recite the Quran in Arabic, they will be the exact same words no matter where you go. The difference will be in translations, right? When you have an English translation, there's at least 25 English translations that I know of personally, and I don't know that much. And so the translations obviously are dependent on the words the translator has chosen to use. So there is only one Quran, but many translations. A secondary scripture for Muslims, which now is man-created, as opposed to the Quran that Muslims believe was divinely revealed, is called the Hadith. Now, this consists of the sayings and the actions of the Prophet Muhammad that were related through the ages by people who were around him at the time, his companions, his family members. And so those are examples that Muslims wish to follow. Now, Hadith is supposed to support what's in the Quran. So if I come across a hadith that does not support, in fact, goes completely opposite to what the Quran teaches, that would be a hadith that I would not pay attention to, because for me, one is divinely revealed and the other is, man created. So the Quran, the hadith is supposed to support the Quran. For example, examples of hadith would be, the world is green and beautiful, and God has appointed you his stewards towards it. Now, the reason I chose this one is because you'll find, when I talk about 3 dimensions of how Islam is taught, this actually refers to that 3rd dimension. So I'm going to get to that in just a bit. Muslims believe in an afterlife. We believe in a day of judgment and in heaven and hell. And for Muslims, although we do believe in a compassionate and merciful God, we also believe there's going to be an accountability for all of our actions and words during this lifetime. Now, here's this is the one that translates really weirdly, because in Arabic, the word is al-qadr, and al-qadr doesn't mean just God's will. And it doesn't mean just predestination. The best way I can say it is, for Muslims, we believe everything that we can see, hear, or touch is God's domain. It all belongs to God. It was given from God. And as such, he knows what's happened in the past, what's happening currently, and what's going to happen in the future. Muslims believe that God does not, control what we do, but he's fully aware of what we've done, are doing, and will do. Now, those are the 6 basic beliefs that Muslims have. Now I'm going to move on to Muslim beliefs and practices. So there are 5 forms of worship and prayer that Muslims conduct on a regular basis. Now I'm going to take that back a little bit. Muslims are supposed to conduct on a regular basis. Like I said, not all Muslims are going to follow, just because it's part of the faith, just because it's tradition. It doesn't mean that 1.8 billion Muslims are doing this. This is what the religion teaches. And so the first one is the Shahada, which is a profession of faith. After that, I'm going to talk about Salat, which is the 5 daily prayers, and then Zakat, which is the required donation, and then Sawm, fasting during Ramadan, and Hajj, which is the pilgrimage to Mecca. So the very first one, the Shahada, a profession of faith. All Muslims, at least once in our life, truly believing these words and truly meaning them, are required to utter the words. And in Arabic, I'll try and point it to you, is La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah Muhammadar Rasulullah, which means there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. Now, having said that I'm only supposed to say that once in my lifetime, truly meaning these words and truly believing them, actually I end up saying them anywhere from 12 to 25 times every single day as part of my daily prayer. Daily prayers, this is Salat. Muslims throughout the world are supposed to pray 5 times every single day, and the 5 times would be before sunrise, at noon, in the afternoon, after sunset, and then at bedtime. Starting at the age of about 7 or so, Muslim parents teach their children how to conduct this very physical, formal prayer. In fact, before that, when children are young, they're already memorizing portions of the Quran so that they'll be able to use them during these prayers. And starting at the age of about 10, Muslims are supposed to take responsibility to start praying 5 times a day and continue praying 5 times a day until the day they die. Now, again, as I mentioned before, not all Muslims pray 5 times a day, but those who do, when they conduct this formal physical prayer, will stand facing towards Mecca. Mecca is a city in Western Saudi Arabia. Now, for you to understand that, if I'm in America, in the US, I face kind of northeasterly to face towards Mecca. Whereas if I'm in India, I would face west. If I'm in, say, South Africa, I'd probably face north. So anywhere I am in the world, I would stand facing towards Mecca. Once I do that, the actions include bowing and then touching, bowing and then touching my head to the ground. Those actions would be repeated 2, 3, or 4 times, depending on the time of day and which prayer it is. Muslim women, regardless of whether they normally wear a headscarf or not, would wear a headscarf for prayer. There are some men who wear a cap when they pray and cover their hair, or sometimes they use a handkerchief to cover their hair to pray. But during the prayer, you can see this gentleman is using a prayer rug. A prayer rug is not holy. It is not something that's required. It's just something to keep dust and dirt off of my clothing and my face because I'm going to be praying on the ground. So it's not necessary, but it's nice just to, keep dust and dirt off of me. A place to pray, just like a church or a temple, in Arabic is called a masjid. In European languages and in English, it's called a mosque. Here are a couple of examples of mosques in America. One is in Ohio, the top left one, and the other one is in DC. But what happens, what do you see inside a mosque, right? When you go inside a church, usually you see rows and rows of chairs, pews. When you go inside a mosque, you really don't see chairs. You see a big open hall with carpeting. There are a few chairs here and there, especially towards the back, for those who are elderly, for those who are injured, for those who are pregnant, who are unable to go through the motions of going all the way down to the ground and going on their knees and stuff. But otherwise, it's mostly just a big empty hall. Muslims will stand up in lines, shoulder to shoulder, and then bow in the same direction. As you can see, the ladies on the far right corner there, they're all sitting in a row. This is probably during the time when they're hearing the sermon or towards the end of their prayer. The third pillar of Islam is called Zakat in Arabic. It is a required donation to charity every year. Muslims give about 2.5%, actually either 2.5% or more, of their wealth to charity. Now, this is different to income. Income is money that comes in on a regular basis to take care of needs and necessities, such as food, clothing, housing, medicine, education. Once I've taken care of all the needs and necessities of my own family, if I have money sitting around in a savings account, money that my family does not need, I would take 2.5% of that and give it to charity. Obviously, I can give more. There's nothing to stop me from giving more, but giving less than 2.5% of the wealth is discouraged. I mean, it's not permitted in terms of, but nobody's going to keep track of what people are doing. It's just what is required as part of the religion. Obviously, I can give every penny I have to charity. Nothing's to stop me, but the basic requirement is 2.5%. The fourth pillar of Islam is fasting during the month of Ramadan. Ramadan is the 9th month of the Muslim calendar. Like I mentioned before, Muslims keep track of a lunar calendar to keep track of holy days and holy months and festivals. The 9th month, during this month, all healthy adult Muslims are required to fast from before sunrise to after sunset for 29 to 30 days of the month. The way Muslims fast is they do not eat a single thing or drink a single thing during daylight hours. So to describe a day in Ramadan, I will, I'll have to explain. So a Muslim family, those who are going to be fasting, will get up at dawn, or actually just a little bit before dawn while it's still dark outside, maybe a half hour or so before that, will get up and eat a small meal, usually consisting of, things that are going to see them through the day. I know, my son, when he was a teenager, used to feel that bread and stuff didn't see him through the day. He would prefer to have proteins because he said, Mom, I tend to do better during the day for that. So they have a small meal, then they stop eating and drinking, at dawn. And during the day, nothing goes past their lips until the sun goes down. Once the sun sets, most Muslims around the world will break their fast using a date, the fruit, a date, just like the Prophet Muhammad did, just to emulate him, and maybe a sip of water. Once they've broken their fast, they conduct the sunset prayer, and then they can eat and drink as they please all through the night if they wish. Obviously, people who work are not going to be up all night eating and drinking, because during Ramadan, Muslims are also supposed to live their lives as they normally would. So if somebody's a teacher and they have to be at school at 7 in the morning, they're not going to spend the whole night being awake just so they can eat and drink. So they have to still conduct their lives as they normally would. Is this easy? No, Ramadan is not supposed to be easy. But at the same time, it's something where one is building willpower, one is learning how to feel compassion for those who don't have as much as we do, also to reflect on oneself. Ramadan is used as a time for Muslims where they reflect on what they have and what they don't, and how they should, adjust what they've been doing wrong. Also, Muslims use this time to strengthen their community relationships, spend time with others in the community, take care of those who don't have as much. They make a point of serving meals to people who are in need. And one very big thing a lot of Muslims do during the month of Ramadan is they will go back to the Quran and read from it and study it, because Muslims consider that Ramadan, the last 10 days of Ramadan, was when the Quran was first revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. So we use that month as a time to reconnect with the Quran and learn more from it. Now, who is required to fast? All healthy adults are required to fast during Ramadan. Now, so if somebody is mentally ill, they are not supposed to fast at all. Somebody who's terminally ill, not supposed to fast. So those people are completely forgiven. They're not required ever to fast. Little children are not required to fast. But an elderly person who's frail and weak is exempt from fasting, but they're not exempt from owing the fast. So what they'll do is they'll give enough money to cover the meal that they did not miss, to pay for a needy person who would have that meal. So in America, let's imagine that's $12 a day. So an elderly person who's going to miss all 29, 30 days of the month of Ramadan would pay a little bit more than $300 to take care of the needs of a person who would need to be fed. And that way, at least their commitment to fasting during the month of Ramadan would be taken care of, but they would still continue with studying the Quran and self-reflection and building community and all of those things. So Ramadan hasn't suddenly disappeared because they're not fasting. It's just that portion of Ramadan is no longer necessary for somebody who's elderly and frail and weak. And of course, a normal, healthy adult can also get sick. If, say I was fasting and all of a sudden I got very sick with the flu or a cold or something, I would stop fasting. The whole point is that I build up my body and my strength again before I can go and fast. So who's considered an adult in Islam? Somebody who's come of age, somebody who's hit puberty, they are now considered an adult. So anywhere between the ages of 11 and 15, people are going to take on the responsibility of being an adult, responsible for their own actions and stuff. So anyone younger than that, no. And there are some young ladies who come of age when they're 7 and 9 years old. Their families, their communities will not consider them adults until, they kind of hold that back until they're 10, 12, I mean, not 10, but 12-ish years old. And then they're allowed to fast and stuff. So usually a person is not really considered an adult until they've hit puberty. Excuse me. What else am I supposed to cover about Ramadan? I think that's it right now, but I'll probably, if you have questions afterwards, I'll cover more. And then the fifth pillar of Islam is a pilgrimage to the city of Makkah. The pilgrimage is referred to as Hajj. It's conducted in the 12th month of the Muslim calendar. Again, all healthy adult Muslims are required to go for Hajj. This is a 3 to 4 day pilgrimage that consists of worship and prayer during that time. and in and around Mecca. So during this time, Muslims from all over the world will travel to Mecca and conduct 3 or 4 days of ritual and prayer and commemorating the life of the Prophet Abraham and his family. So pretty much all of the prayers and ritual that are conducted during the Hajj, during this pilgrimage, are following the footsteps of Prophet Abraham and his family. And anywhere from 2 to 3.5 million Muslims perform the Hajj every year. Obviously, that changed last year due to COVID. They actually had to restrict it down to maybe a couple of thousand. I don't know what the actual numbers were last year. And I think this year they opened it up again with safety precautions and social distancing and stuff. But it has come back a little bit, but obviously not the kinds of numbers that we saw before the pandemic. Here's the building that's in the middle. If you look right there, it's a cube-shaped building referred to as the Kaaba. That is the direction of prayer for Muslims. So, you know how I told you that if I'm in America, I face kind of northeast. If I'm, you know, in India, I face west. Well, we're pointing towards Makkah and pointing specifically or facing specifically towards this one point, not because we worship the building, but more for the sake of uniformity so that all Muslims have one direction in which they pray. Muslims believe that the Prophet Abraham and his son Ishmael built this building as the first house of worship for one God. It is not a black building. That is a black cloth with gold embroidery, and the gold embroidery actually is calligraphy using passages of the Quran that are embroidered right along the top over there. Yes, there is a door that you can enter into it, but people can't. It's kept closed, especially at times when there's a lot of people, because there is only one door. You can imagine going in and not being able to get out would be kind of difficult for 2 to 3 million people. If you look down here, towards the bottom, you can see people bowing down in prayer. And again, Muslims are not bowing to the Kaaba, they're bowing towards the Kaaba. Um, and so if you go back to this picture right here, I'm sorry, you can see all of these little white dots coming out in every direction. That is people in prayer. And you can see that the mosque, although it has a capacity of 1.7 million, people are all the way out in the streets here. At the time of Hajj, it is full. And so you can see that. Now, one thing I do want to point out is although an ancient ritual and prayer goes on in the city of Makkah during the Hajj and also throughout the year, this is a very modern city. If you can look way in the back, there are high rises, there are cell phones, there are Starbucks, there's Burger King and Pizza Hut. So it's a modern city, but in this modern city, we have Muslims from all over the world that come here to pray and worship. Muslims celebrate two major holidays, or rather religious holidays. The word Eid in Arabic means festival. So the first one is Eid al-Fitr, which is the festival of the breaking of the fast, which is celebrated after the last day of Ramadan, the month of fasting. And the other one is Eid al-Adha, which is the festival of the sacrifice, which is celebrated towards the end of the Hajj pilgrimage. Now, when I say the festival of the sacrifice, we're not talking about any sacrifice that Muslims are giving. This is for those of you who know the story of the Prophet Abraham, in reference to the sacrifice that he was asked to give of his son's life to show his love and obedience of God. Now, on both holidays, the first day starts off first thing in the morning with Muslims giving to charity. So for Eid al-Fitr, Muslims will give money, food, clothes, gifts, whatever it is, to the needy. And on Eid al-Adha, what they give pretty much always is going to be meat, right? They're going to go and get meat that is shared with their neighbors, with people who are in need, and with themselves. So that is what's given to charity first thing in the morning of that day. Because if you think about it, what's the first thing that goes off my grocery list when my budget goes down? Meat is the most expensive item in our groceries. And so to save money, people would, so that's what's given for charity on that day. And also it commemorates the history behind the Prophet Abraham and his the sacrifice that he was asked to give. Now, those are the practices and beliefs in Islam. And now, what am I supposed to do with those practices and beliefs? Muslims are not just supposed to be good people and pray and not lie and believe in God. All of those beliefs and practices are supposed to translate into actions for those around us, for taking care of the world, and to reflect that we have certain beliefs that are there to take care of not just us and our family, but our neighbors and those around us. So the last one, ihsan, actually translates to making beauty happen, making things beautiful. So ihsan would be excellence in character and actions. So living one's life as if one sees God and knowing that God sees us is what's important for Muslims. And so following the golden rule, right? So Muslims have been told that they're here as God's ambassadors, and that as such, we will be held responsible for taking care of other people, animals, and our environment. And so ihsan comes under that. Here's the golden rule, according to many faiths. And in Islam, we have a hadith that says, none of you are real believers until you wish for others what you wish for yourself. So now I can stop here and open it up for questions. So it's up to you.
If you could please, anybody put your questions into the chat. And we already have one question that was asked earlier. I can just read the questions if you like, but it says, in what way will the judgment day take form? Are there different interpretations?
Wow, there are so many descriptions. Yes, there are many, many descriptions. What Muslims have generally been told is when the end of the world happens, everything in the universe will implode and completely disappear. And then, so all living things will no longer be here. And then we will all face God. Now, these are descriptions I imagine that are used for humans to understand in the form that we're in, but also we need to understand that we're not necessarily going to have the bodies we have. So we're told that some of the descriptions include it being so hot that it feels like there's two of our suns, the sun that we have, two of them right next to us, right? So that's how hot it's going to be. We won't have any shade. We will be so worried about saving ourselves that we won't recognize our parents, we won't recognize our children, we won't recognize anything. So some of those are descriptions and they're pretty horrendous, but at the same time, there's a lot of description about compassion and mercy, and there's a lot of descriptions about how our deeds and our words and our will bear witness for or against us. That so that's the day of judgment. Now, there are descriptions of what one's going to feel inside the grave. There are descriptions of what, would heaven and hell be like. So there's all sorts of descriptions, but of course, none of us having been there, we have no idea. So these are all just descriptions. And some of those things I described might be from Hadith, some of them might be from the Quran, and some of them might be just traditions that have been passed down. So, some of the descriptions I just gave are not necessarily coming from the Quran. Hopefully that answered your question.
And there had been another one asking about heaven. So maybe we can take that one to be answered just because there are a lot of questions coming in, so I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to all of them. But the next one was asking about what is the Kaaba and what is its significance?
The Kaaba, according to Muslims, we believe that the Prophet Abraham and his son Ishmael had built it as the first place of worship on earth to worship one God. We believe that the significance is that it's a unifying direction for all Muslims to pray towards. So that when I'm standing here, in my house praying, I don't have my child come along and pray at me or pray in a different direction, that we're all praying towards the same direction. And you can imagine a quarter of the world's population, it would be pretty chaotic if we were just praying in any direction. So I think that's a unifying direction. The significance is that we believe it is in the city in which the Prophet Muhammad was born. It has, according to Muslim tradition throughout history, been a place of worship and a place of congregation. So even between the time of Prophet Abraham and the time of Prophet Muhammad, even though it fell in the hands of those who worship multiple gods, it was still a place of worship. So people who came to it for pilgrimage also came, even though they were worshiping other than the God of Abraham. So Mecca has, been a place of, a direction of prayer for thousands of years. But the Kaaba itself, we believe, was built for the sake of worship of one God. And then it went back once it came back to Muslims. It has continued to be that way. I hope I answered your question.
There's the next two. I think maybe they're closely enough related. Maybe you could address them both. But it's one is how can we as allies best support the Muslim community in the United States? And the next one is what do you think is one main misconception people have between or about Muslims and Islam?
Wow, the second one's a difficult one. How can one be allies? I think I think an ally is a person who understands and respects um, the person that they're trying to support. And so getting to know Muslims, getting to know what their needs are and what it is that they're going through, um, would enable one to be a better ally. One doesn't have to believe what Muslims believe, but understanding and respecting what they believe is enough. I think so. Reaching out to Muslims, finding out about them, teaching them about who you are, learning about who they are, and just being a good neighbor would be a great way to be an ally. Speaking up, um, not just for Muslims, but for others who are under attack for whatever reason, that's a great way to be an ally. So, yes, thank you for that question. Um, the other one, what are the misconceptions? There are so many. Uh, Unfortunately, there are so many, misconceptions about Muslims out there. People people think all Muslims pray 5 times a day. They don't. They're humans. People feel that Islam oppresses women. It doesn't. Humans oppress women, right? And so there are cultures and traditions around the world that oppress women. Um, it has nothing to do with Islam. People just use the religion as an excuse to do that, when in fact Islam, liberated women 1400 years ago. Women were given the right to vote according to Islam 1400 years ago. Women were given the right to earn and keep their own property. They were given the right to choose who they marry. Um, all of these things were given as a right to women over 1400 years ago, but yet the world thinks that Islam oppresses women. So there are many misconceptions out there. And of course, relating Muslims to terrorism because of what we hear in the news all the time, that's another misconception, which is very sad because that has real world implications. That has real world results where young children and women and men who are Muslims are constantly under attack. You hear stories of random people who just decided that it was okay to drive a truck into a family of Muslims who was walking after an evening meal, right? This happened, I think, in Canada a few months ago. So this is the kind of violence and hate that comes from these misconceptions. So unfortunately, I can't even, list the number of misconceptions that are out there, but all of them are causing us to hate others, which is very, very sad. Hopefully, I'm answering these questions properly. I don't know.
I think so. Thank you. The next one is, what is the Islamic point of view toward the LGBT community?
Wow. The Islamic point of view for Muslims, we believe that all humans, all creation came from God, right? So there are, as far as Muslims are concerned, as far as the Quran is concerned, all of us come from God and are accountable to God. As a person, I don't have the right to judge anyone the same way I would hope that nobody would judge me. I would prefer to be judged only by my Creator, who I believe to be ultimately compassionate, ultimately merciful, and know who I am. Having said that, Muslims, just like some Christians, I mean, there's, some Muslims, just like some Christians, some Jews, some judge other people based on this. They will use stories of Sodom and Gomorrah. They will use other stories to treat people in the LGBT community in a disrespectful, even harmful way. This seems to be the case, across the board in different religious communities. Muslims are not an exception, or some Muslims are not an exception. According to the Quran, God created all people the same, men and women, and we will all be judged for the way we behaved by Him. So hopefully humans don't judge each other. But what I'm told is, as a Muslim, I am to respect and take care of all people. It doesn't say that I'm supposed to respect and love only Muslims, or I'm supposed to love and respect all of God's creation. So, unfortunately, just like those in other religious traditions, there are also Muslims who will choose and who will judge and who will mistreat. And I'm so sorry for that. But from my understanding of the Quran, there is nothing that speaks out against any people, because we believe all of them are God's creation, and therefore God to judge for me as well. I mean, He's going to judge me, He's going to judge everybody. And it's not for us. So hopefully I answered it. Yes, just like in the Old Testament, there is, stories of Sodom and Gomorrah and all of that. But as far as we're concerned as people, judgment is God's alone and not ours. So we're supposed to treat people with respect and love. Hopefully, I can never tell if I'm not here in person. This online thing is not a good way for me to gauge if I've actually answered your question. So sorry about that.
Thank you. There are two questions that are both about how mosques treat the direction toward Mecca. Like, in the construction of the mosque, if a part of the mosque is facing Mecca, or I guess maybe if you could talk a bit about that.
All right, yes. So every mosque that's built, people have already figured out the direction to Mecca, because that's the way in which people are going to stand and face. So that's already been figured out before construction happens. So that's how it's built, right? So whatever that building is going to be built with the niche, the prayer niche being set up so that the whole building, the whole room will face towards that. So yes, that is taken into consideration at the time of construction, or actually before construction when it's being designed. So depending on where you are in the world, it'll be in whichever cardinal direction. It'll be eastward, the east side of the building, or the west side of the building, or the north side of the building, depending on where we are. But yes, that is definitely something that's taken into consideration at the planning phase of the mosque, not, after the fact.
Okay, thank you. There's so many questions, and I think some of these you already addressed in your talk. Like there's one asking about if the Quran is similar to the Bible, and I think you did already talk about how it's treated as a text. But there's another question here about fasting, and well, there are two related questions here. So one is saying, is someone with anemia excused from fasting? And the other one is kind of related to your ability to engage in something like that. So it says, does a person's mental health have an effect on whether they're seen as a healthy adult, for example, in doing something like fasting? And the example is given of someone with ADHD.
Okay, again, I'm not a scholar. I'm not a physician, so I could not tell you at what point one is considered mentally unwell enough not to fast. My understanding is that if I am unable to differentiate why I'm starving, I shouldn't be fasting, right? If my mental faculties cannot explain to me why somebody is not giving me food in time, I'm not getting anything from my fast. Now, from what I understand, somebody with ADHD, and please forgive me, I do not know anything about the technicalities. They do not have the inability to understand why they're restricting themselves from fasting. So to me, from what I understand, somebody with ADHD would not necessarily be exempt. And again, please understand, I know nothing about the medical condition itself, so I'm not a person who'd be able to answer that. In terms of the first condition they gave, I'm sorry, would you mind repeating what the first condition was first? The second one they said was ADHD. What was the first one?
Anemia.
Anemia. And again, that might be something that does, right? It brings you down to so much, your sugar level is already low when you're not eating. And if you have lack of blood, it's probably even worse. So that would probably be a condition where one would not need to fast or not be able to fast. I know that women during their monthly cycle are not required to fast. And because, I always joke that, God knows his creation, PMS and low sugar, not a good combination. But women are considered unwell during their period. And so they're not required to fast during that time. Once they've taken the 5-7 days off from fasting, they can go back to fasting once the period is over. So yes, that's considered not well enough to fast. So again, I'm sorry if I'm unable to answer, but I don't know um, the medical conditions that ADHD covers and what is involved. So to me, a person like a little child doesn't know why you're not giving them food and water. That's just torture. They're not learning anything from that. So they wouldn't be required to fast. So just the same way, a person who's uh, unable to figure out why it is that they're not fasting, not learning anything from it. So they would be the ones who wouldn't be required to fast. Sorry that I didn't answer your question but that was the best I can cover.
Thank you. There's another one, a very precise question about religious practice. So, uh, when praying, in order to properly face in the right direction, what would a Muslim do if he or she is unable to tell which direction is the direction toward Mecca? Like if you were confined in jail or something like that.
They would just pray, right? The importance is not so much the direction of prayer, but the fact that I do pray. The direction of prayer would be nice, but quite honestly, if I'm lost in the desert, I would rather just pray than try and figure out. If I knew the direction to pray, I'd probably be able to get myself out of the desert. But like you said, in prison or something, not as important to know the direction as it is to be able to just pray.
Thank you. There's another one asking about halal and haram, and how that applies to diet and other, basic lifestyle questions.
So the words halal and haram is halal would be permissible and haram, I guess, not permissible or even sinful. So in terms of dietary, the word halal literally means permissible. What has happened is over the last few decades or over the, course of time, the word halal has actually almost replaced the word dhabiha. Dhabiha is the way in which things are slaughtered, just like, meat being kosher or food being kosher, and especially the animal, there's a certain way of slaughtering in the Jewish tradition. The same way for dhabiha, it's the way in which the animal is slaughtered that is acceptable. Halal, on the other hand, is for everything that's permissible. So Muslims can eat, beef, they can eat chicken, they can eat fish. All of that is halal. But the way it's slaughtered and the way it's prepared, excuse me, which is dhabiha, is what makes it the equivalent of kosher. Any act, anything that we do that is permissible is halal. Now, haram, there's very few things that are actually haram, which are actually sinful. So if I was, how do I explain this? It is haram, I suppose, to kill somebody. That's haram. That's sinful. If I accidentally eat something that I'm not supposed to, that's not haram. That's a mistake, right? So Muslims in their dietary restrictions are not allowed to eat any pig meat. So they're not allowed to drink alcohol. So those are dietary restrictions. Not allowed to eat carrion. If an animal was already dead, found a dead animal on the road, you cannot eat that because we don't know how it died. Muslims may not eat blood. People, there are cultures around the world that have blood pudding and blood sausage. Muslims, that's not allowed in Islam. So there are certain restrictions in terms of dietary restrictions. But halal and haram literally are permissible and not permissible. And that can fall under so many categories. Hopefully I answered at least part of your question there.
Thank you. There's another question about the headscarf and why somebody might choose to wear a headscarf or choose not to wear a headscarf.
In Islam, both men and women are required to dress modestly in such a way that we're not attracting attention to our physical form, right? So tight-fitting clothes and all of those things might be considered not acceptable in Islam. So the headscarf is considered an extension of this idea of modest clothing, modest dress. Women who do wear the headscarf are doing it not for men, they're not doing it for human beings, the majority of them are doing it because they feel that they're doing it for the sake of God, for their modesty. Those who don't wear a headscarf out in public, like myself, basically have an understanding that modesty is not just in dress, but also in behavior. The way I behave, the way I speak, that also has to show my modesty. So I do not feel that the headscarf is required for me to wear, but there are women who will translate, the idea of modest dress to include the headscarf. Now, why some choose to and why some choose not to is going to be as private and as different for every single human being. You'll find families where the mother does not wear a headscarf, but the daughter does. You'll find families where all of, the whole family doesn't wear a headscarf, the extended family, and yet one person in that whole family chooses to wear a headscarf. And then you go to cultures around the world where everybody's wearing a headscarf. All the ladies are wearing a headscarf. So again, it's the way Muslims have understood it. It is what is traditionally done in their families, in their communities. It's how they've interpreted it. So it varies from family to family, region to region, person to person. It's going to be different every time. But the requirement, the basic requirement is both men and women need to dress modestly, need to behave modestly, need to act modestly.
Okay, thank you. This next question, I think, is maybe meant as a follow-up on the LGBT question. It is, does the Koran teach that marriage should be between a man and a woman?
As far as I know, yes. Sorry, I don't know how to expound on that. I'm not a scholar of the Quran. As far as I understand, yes, that's what it teaches.
Okay, just looking through these. So there's, I think, so someone else asked, Muslims believe founded the religion. I think you addressed that already. Um, there are a lot of people thanking you for a great lecture in the
Thank you.
chat.
Thank you.
And so there are now some more questions about the diet, about dietary restrictions. So there's a question of like why Muslims are not supposed to eat pork, and also a question of like what about gelatin, like they might find in marshmallows?
So, why are we not supposed to eat pork? I have no idea. You can bring 17 Muslims here and they'll all give you 17 different answers. The best answer I can give you, and this is my own personal thing, is that the Quran and my religion give me so many freedoms that when they give me a restriction like this, it's just one small restriction. And so it doesn't bother me enough for me to go look into it. Other people will tell you that you can get trichinosis. You can have all sorts of issues that come from eating pork. I'm not going to look into that. The Quran asked me not to, so I don't. However, I'm sorry, you said there was a second part to that. Oh, the lard, the gelatin. So again, as an extension of not being able to eat um, pig and pig meat, when gelatin is made using pig's hoofs, Muslims will avoid that, as will Jews. So if the hoof is, a beef hoof or something, that's going to be fine with them. So yes, there is gelatin that's out there, marshmallows out there that are made with not pig products, and so they'll have that. There are Muslims who know this so well that they will tell you which medication, things like capsules that have porcine ingredients making up the outside of they'll avoid that. So, I mean, I don't know any of those things. I don't know those details, but there are Muslims and Jews who know that as well, who are very particular about their diets, and they pay attention to that. But yes, they will avoid marshmallows that are not kosher, not halal.
Okay, thank you. There's another question asking, do Muslims believe Jesus was crucified for claiming to be king?
Wow. How do you answer that? I don't believe that Muslims believe that he was killed for claiming to be king. I believe that Muslims believe that he was killed for you know people being against what he was teaching, right? He was going against what was what leadership was teaching, etc., etc. So that's what we believe. But regardless of that, Muslims believe that God actually saved Jesus from being crucified. And so for Muslims, we believe that he is near God, waiting to come back. So for Muslims, Jesus actually never died an earthly death, and that he will return and live out the rest of his life as a human and then pass away like a normal human being sometime in the future. So Muslims are waiting for the return of Jesus to come back and save the world. But that's because they believe that he never actually had an earthly death, and that he is going to be able to live out his life that way. So hopefully that answers at least part of that question. But I don't think that we believe he was killed for saying he was king, because I don't think we ever believed that he said he was king. He was just a good person who was a prophet who was teaching. So
Okay, thank you. I think everything else is just people thanking you for a great presentation, saying they learned a lot. And I would like to thank you as well for coming again and giving this talk at Chandler-Gilbert.
thank you very
I'd like
much.
to thank also everybody for attending, and this was a great discussion at the end. Thank everybody for participating in the discussion also. And remember, you can register for spring classes. Remember to enroll in some philosophy and religious studies classes, everybody.